Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about zero trust. We're just trying to do a top line here, state of the state. Jim, I'm going to throw it over to you at Fortinet. You all are right smack in the middle of enabling this capability, a piece of this capability, certainly for all of public sector and certainly private sector. To just give us a top line, state of the state. How's it going?
Hey, Luke, well, it's good to be with you again today. And, as you said, Fortinet is in the middle of the ecosystem. We've got a broad and deep set of capabilities. And what we're doing with our federal partners is focusing on helping them build the foundations for zero trust. Depends on whose model you look at. You've got, 3 to 6 pillars of doing it. And as challenging as it can be for our federal partners to do zero trust in an agency headquarters network environment, as my federal colleagues have described, it gets exponentially harder to do that for organizations that have a broader, a national or even global operating footprint. So let me give you a real quick top line of 3 different use cases of success stories that we've done over the past year with federal partners. Let me pull out, we've already talked a little bit about identity is a key. A user identity. We helped one cabinet agency recently create a capability to better enforce multi-factor authentication and to integrate this new capability with existing user identity capabilities such as PIV cards. And they're rolling that out for 40,000 users coast to coast. Device management and access control. We've helped another agency identify and define security policy for headless devices on their network. We know those, of course, are a real bear. You can't, that's the source of problems with IoT, et cetera. So when you get these devices on the network that have the potential to become rogue devices, we gave them the capability to integrate that device management and access control with other capabilities they had in their infrastructure to track the behavior of those devices and to be able to alert if they started displaying abnormal behavior. And then the whole policy enforcement and segmentation, that's another key to doing zero trust. We helped a third agency that had a really broad operational network infrastructure, a complex one, move the focus of their enforcement and policy core closer to the localized data, basically via better segmentation. So we gave them the ability to have smaller firewalls that still shared information and acted as a unified whole for the policy enforcement, the ability to have that synchronized and consistent. That's the core of zero trust. So again, you got all these pillars and you've got a player like Fortinet that can say, we can help you both develop those, and people have already mentioned, I think it was implicit in what Brian said, integration. You have these disparate things, you need to make them work and play well together. So we're giving our partners the ability to introduce something new and to harmonize it with things they already have in their infrastructure.
Sure, and really give them choices. It's almost like, again, it's this constellation, sort of Lego block kind of configuration that allows them to enable this capability as they see fit. Brian, how about over to you? I want to give an example of sort of one specific area that you'd like to highlight. So you're coming at it from a different angle, as you pointed out there, as a CTO versus a CISO, but I'm sure you have an example of one particular thing you'd like to highlight in regards to something that you all have embraced over there, enabled, authorized, whatever it may be, to allow this capability to start to get propagated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've actually had some pretty good success in a few different areas at DHS. I mean, we took a very practical approach to zero trust. We really looked at, again, impact. How can we positively affect the security posture and the users' users' interest in zero trust? But I think our biggest one was really the implementation of those things that tie into our cloud assets. Things like the cloud access security broker, the cloud security gateway. We knew that we were going to try to move things out of the VPN. But even prior to going into the telework posture that we're in now, we knew we were moving a lot of things to the cloud. We were closing down a data center. We knew that cloud was going to be a focus for the department. Part of that is mission, part of that is just optimization. So we knew we were going to need cloud-based solutions for our security, and we knew that we were going to need to be able to have them in a scalable fashion. So, for us, we really got a little bit of a head start in trying to address, the overutilization via telework. we had started our cloud security gateway work going back to maybe the December, January timeframe. And we had started on the cloud access security broker around January and February. So, for us, that was a little fortuitous that we had a chance to kind of get out ahead of that. And we had, started moving some of our access early in March, prior to everybody heading out for the telework posture. But I think, one of the best cases that I can say is that, when everybody showed up on telework in that mid-March timeframe, we had flipped the switch to kind of move the highest volume applications, those email, those, productivity apps, some of the things that we had already moved out to the cloud. We were able to flip the switch pretty quickly and kind of move those types of things off of the VPN, get that VPN traffic to things that were primarily still internal, things that we really needed to keep inside the network. And those things that we had moved outside the network, we were able to get them off the VPN. And we had very, very little problems with, almost quadrupling our VPN access requests and VPN traffic, really because I think we had been a little bit proactive in trying to get, CASB, CSG, getting applications to the cloud, and really giving, those alternate paths that didn't require a VPN to come into the network just to go back out to the network.
Be able to scale it up quickly and also continue to make sure it's very secure. Sammy, how about at Okta? Can you give us an example of a program that you all have implemented on behalf of the public sector or the private sector, quite frankly, that's really allowed some of this, zero trust capability to be enabled inside of an environment?
Yeah, absolutely. There's several great examples, and they come at all scales. I mentioned earlier that we had a local county government who was facing this, and as you can imagine, their budget is has a different number of zeros than some of our partners here on the call today, and it meant that they needed to really move forward rapidly and use the technology that they already have. So oftentimes, what you can do is really look at your whole technology stack and take an inventory and say, does this actually give me those core design principles or properties of zero trust? Does it give me better context? Can I act on that context? Is it perimeterless by design? And you can look at your whole security and technology stack and say, what if we just tie this together? What is the glue that's tying it together and allows us to move forward rapidly? We have, of course, federal government partners and industry customers who are doing the same thing. At the high end of the scale, there's an industry example that might be the best, where FedEx, as a global logistics company, really made a move and accelerated as well. I think that they really moved all of their critical applications. Instead of a 14-month timeline, they did over a literal weekend, where they took tens of thousands of individuals and enabled access to all those critical applications, into a zero trust model. And the switchover was literally 36 hours. And I think the original project plan was several months. So if you have those building blocks in place and you've done your inventories, sometimes you can truly accelerate those kind of transformations. And it's all about, like was mentioned earlier, it's not really a technology issue per se, although we are all dealing with technology. It's really a fundamental shift in that mindset on saying, how do I measure the access? What are the controls that I have? How do I apply them consistently? And often we see that since we are at the heart of that auth and auth C decision, we are often, used as the glue that ties that into a complete solution.
And if I may, and put those operators in a situation where they can make a good, solid risk-based decision about,
Absolutely.
which way they want to operate as they're kind of stacking some weight on top of these things. Speaking of risk, I just can't imagine, again, the complexity that you all have, thousands of trading partners out there, the traveling public at large, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, it gets flipped upside down. Your entire workforce now is in a new operating model on top of everything else you're trying to do. Give us an example of sort of, where you fit a piece of this in there and that allow some of this zero trust to enable some of these capabilities that you're just impressed upon you.
Yeah, so really this starts with, I think, a transformation overall of how we deliver network services. Fundamentally, we're changing how we connect all of our systems together. And a lot of that goes hand in hand with the migration into cloud and into other SaaS services. And naturally, as we're picking up and now we're making, these cloud services are obviously internet based as the foundation of what we're doing, then it makes sense to be able to have the right technology to be able to connect directly into all those services. But one thing that's really, really important to Footstomp is, while we're doing that, we have to obviously ensure that we know what all of those endpoints are doing, that we have still common centralized security logging and security management of those devices, and that full picture of all of these integrated services and how they're coming together so that we can optimize all the traffic while still maintaining, not only all of the legacy standards, but again, also this idea of zero trust, where they really can only access exactly what they're explicitly authorized to access. So, one of the areas where this is really, really important for CP overall is how we do IoT. Obviously, we have a lot of different types of non-traditional technologies, things like unmanned aerial systems, ground sensors, all sorts of other technologies in the radiation portal monitors, other things in the field that really don't fit the same model. And in the past, I think our answer was, well, we'll just air gap these things. We just won't plug them into the rest of the network because they don't meet the same security standards. And that, as a response, it really is just not acceptable anymore. It's not what we're doing anymore. And in addition to the heightened security requirements that we have, now we're also really trying to build better common operational pictures across all of the various mission sets that we have. So we're bringing all that data from all the different types of sensors in, and we're building those common views, which means the connectivity and doing that securely is really, really key. So we're using IoT type technologies along with 4G and 5G, and we're able to take some of these other endpoints and tunnel them. Essentially, the idea is go directly into the cloud, directly into like API gateways and other types of services where we can exchange just the exact data we want after we've made a specific identification on what we're talking to, and we have some integrity checks and things like that. But really bringing that data together in a way that we can dynamically add all sorts of different things onto the network. You just drop a SIM chip on it and it gives it the connectivity it needs to hit the internet and then to hit our services. And it really is expanding, our view and the options of how we integrate technologies in a way that we couldn't even think about previously.
Right, and much more seamless. And I hear you. The days of the air gap on the IoT, which are, as you pointed out, thousands of those, right? That instrumentation, you need the data that it's collecting so that you can analyze it and make informed decisions. So I'm glad to see that this framework is allowing that to happen. Junaid, how about at Verizon? We just heard about 4G, 5G, et cetera. Give us an example of where you're implementing some of this capability that's allowing the that zero trust kind of ecosystem to start to be enabled inside of an agency or even a private sector environment.
We've got a lot of zero trust projects here at Verizon, but I want to call upon one because it was so interesting, and actually I was involved in it quite a bit. Sallie Mae decided to move its loan processing to the cloud. As everybody knows, Sallie Mae is a regulated financial institution, and the regulations around all financial information was really written probably 20 years ago. And the context was a physical server that is air gapped in a building that's locked down. As everybody knows, it's impossible to change banking regulations, but what we're able to do is show equivalence. And what we did is we deployed something called a software defined perimeter gateway, an SDP gateway, which is how we manage TCP for zero trust. And we deployed it in AWS and Azure. And what they did is it effectively blocked TCP from connecting to the cloud. So these even though these were public cloud instances, they were effectively black. You couldn't even bring up a TCP session. And then what we did is we configured the network so that only an inbound connection coming from the Sallie Mae data center would be accepted. Then in the data center, we set up a relay that the employee had to be badged into the correct floor, into the correct laptop to access the instance. So what we were able to do and show the regulators is we could use a zero trust architecture to make a cloud instance behave exactly like a physical server in their data center, which was locked down. The reason I use this as example is it was all software and networking, which we could extend out to any model. So the important point here that I think for the listeners is that the zero trust architecture allows us to synthesize in software and using network technologies any kind of like physical environment in the virtual world without compromise. So zero trust is not about giving something up. In fact, it's the opposite. We can take things like, in this case, Sally Mae, banking regulations, which we couldn't change, and actually recreate them in a completely cloud and virtual environment. And I see more of this as the future.
Fantastic. If I may, that's a fantastic use case there. And on behalf of all the policymakers and regulators, I know they're trying really hard to keep up with the technology, but the great news is the technology has gotten so powerful now, you can do things like the example you just described there. Chris, how about Department of Navy? Can you give us an example of one area that you all are enabling that's allowing this, that zero trust is allowing you to sort of bring in some capability that perhaps you couldn't have done sort of short of a zero trust architecture?
Well, yeah, and I'm going to have to go back to a lot of the things I said in my first answer. You know,
Sure.
the Navy, the Department of Defense has always been chasing certain security constructs, right? Perimeter defense.
And Chris, if I may, you mentioned DODIN. I just want to make sure people
Sure.
know what DODIN is
Department of Defense,
on your last one.
Yeah, Department of Defense Information Network, and then of course there's the DODIN N, Navy. So when we reference that, we reference it. It's the network.
Sure.
Originally run by DISA, where there's enclaves inside of it that each of the services have. So when I say DODIN or DODIN N, I'm just referring to the Navy network. As we've looked at securing that environment over the decades, obviously we've followed different models, right? It went from perimeter security, then we were going down the comply to connect model for a long time, and then COVID really pushed us to want to adopt zero trust a lot faster. But arguably the Navy and the Navy's networks, particularly at the transport layer, somewhere between 10 to 15 years behind where they need to be. So there were lots of things, there's lots of housekeeping that we needed to do. So as we looked at zero trust, what really enabled us to do it was the fact that we were doing it almost exclusively outside the DODIN. We were setting up an environment that lived outside the DODIN to connect users who live outside the DODIN to information that for the most part exists outside the DODIN in some of these cloud environments. So and I guess the analogy would be, you never let a good crisis go to waste, right? Sure. There are a lot of these things that we were trying to do, but just being overcome with other events. I mean, you can only imagine the breadth of scope of priorities and different projects and different initiatives that go on within, an organization of 800,000 people and 1 million email addresses and 240 networks to one degree or another, whether accepted or unaccepted, that we're trying to manage. So what this has really allowed us to do more than anything else, and the technology, I think lots of people have addressed the actual technology challenges and the ways that technology has come to it. What this has allowed us to address at the Department of the Navy is a new way of thinking. We probably, without COVID, might still just be talking about zero trust as a construct. The deputy J3 over at US Cybercom, General Paul Stanton, he was a true sort of believer in this contract of zero trust. And I remember pre-COVID, he would brief it all the time. And that's just what it was. They were briefing slides. And we got in meetings, we listened to it and we heard it. We said, that's great. It's the next thing, right? The new shiny thing. And then COVID hit and it changed everybody's thinking. And it went from a science experiment to, hey, we got to do this. And again, what was encouraging in an organization as large as the Department of the Navy is how quickly we were able to adopt. And really, when you put the screws to a military organization, if they know anything, we know how to react and maneuver to respond to crisis.
100%. All of a sudden, right? You're laser focused, right? You know what to do. All these other things sort of get out of the way, and it's time to implement this capability that obviously you guys have been discussing for some time, and that's a great example, great use case to get focused and then take this capability and really take it to the next level. I'm glad to hear that. All right, we're going to take a short break and we'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network.